There's no fight like a McGregor fight.
The story of UFC 329 doesn't begin in a modern arena under neon lights. It begins 12 years ago, in a world that didn't yet know the names Conor McGregor and Max Holloway would become synonymous with the very soul of mixed martial arts. It was 2013, a time when the UFC was still carving its path into the mainstream, and two young, hungry prospects stepped into the octagon with everything to prove and nothing to lose. Conor McGregor, a brash Irishman with a left hand that felt like a lightning bolt, had just made a sensational debut. Max Holloway, a skinny, resilient kid from the islands of Hawaii, was the youngest fighter on the roster. That night in Boston, they traded leather for 15 minutes. McGregor won the decision, but he did it on one leg after tearing his ACL mid-fight. Holloway, despite the loss, showed a chin made of granite and a spirit that refused to break. Little did we know, we were watching the birth of two legends whose paths would diverge wildly before inevitably circling back to each other. For the next decade, Conor McGregor became a supernova. He didn't just fight, he transformed the sport into a global spectacle. He predicted knockouts and delivered them with surgical precision. He captured two belts simultaneously, crossed over into boxing to face Floyd Mayweather, and became the highest-paid athlete on the planet. He was the notorious one, a man whose every word was a headline and every movement was a cultural event. But with that stratospheric rise came the inevitable turbulence. The fame, the wealth, and the distractions of a life lived in the spotlight began to chip away at the disciplined warrior who had once slept on a gym floor in Dublin. Meanwhile, Max Holloway took the long, hard road. He didn't have the meteoric rise or the flashy persona of McGregor. Instead, he had consistency. He went on a legendary 13-fight win streak, cleaning out the featherweight division and becoming one of the most beloved champions in history. While McGregor was in the headlines for his business ventures and controversies, Holloway was in the gym, perfecting the art of the blessed era. He became the volume king, the man who would point to the center of the octagon in the final seconds and invite his opponents to a phone booth war. But as the years passed, the gap between them grew. McGregor faced devastating losses, including a horrific leg injury that many thought would end his career. He spent 5 years away from the cage, a ghost of the man who once ruled the world. People started to speak of him in the past tense. They said the fire was gone, replaced by the comforts of his millions. They said he was a relic of a bygone era. The Max, on the other hand, just kept evolving. He moved up in weight, took on the most dangerous strikers in the world, and recently delivered a knockout of the century against Justin Gaethje to claim the BMF title. He became the symbol of what it means to be a true fighter, someone who shows up, regardless of the stakes, and gives his soul to the sport. And then, the announcement came. UFC 329. McGregor vs. Holloway 2. The rematch 12 years in the making. The world stood still. This wasn't just a fight, it was a collision of two completely different legacies. One man fighting to reclaim his throne and prove he still belongs, and another fighting to cement his status as the greatest to ever do it. As the press conference began, the air was thick with a strange mix of nostalgia and hostility. McGregor walked onto that stage not as the young contender from 2013, but as a seasoned veteran who had seen the highest peaks and the lowest valleys. Holloway sat across from him, no longer the skinny kid, but a seasoned general of the octagon. The tension was palpable. Every time they looked at each other, you could see the memories of that night in Boston flashing in their eyes. McGregor spoke of his return as a resurrection. He talked about his prime, his focus, and his desire to do what no one has ever done, win a third world title in a third weight class. He looked sharp, he looked lean, and for the first time in years, he looked hungry. Holloway, however, remained unfazed. He has heard the McGregor hype before. He knows that the man standing in front of him is not the same man he fought 12 years ago, but he also knows that he himself has become a monster. He spoke about deep waters, a warning to Conor that the 5-round war he was inviting him into would be unlike anything he has experienced in half a decade. The first part of this journey is about understanding that weight. The weight of time, the weight of expectation, and the weight of two legacies that are about to be tested like never before. This is the prologue to a war that has been brewing for over a decade. As we move into the heart of the UFC 329 story, the focus shifts from the past to the present, and specifically, to the man who remains the most polarizing figure in combat sports history. Conor McGregor's return is not just a sports story, it's a psychological study. For 5 years, the world watched him through social media clips, yacht parties, and business launches. But at the UFC 329 press conference, we saw a glimpse of the man behind the brand. There was a different tone in Conor's voice this time. The usual vitriol and insults were still there, but they were layered over something deeper, a newfound sense of purpose. He spoke openly about his religious faith and the role his family played in his recovery. For a man who once defined himself by his material success, this version of McGregor seemed to be searching for something more eternal. He spoke about the peace he found in the gym, the discipline of the early morning runs, and the silence of the training camp. It was as if he was trying to strip away the notorious persona and return to the Mac who just loved to fight. But don't let the talk of peace fool you. When the subject turned to the octagon, the predator re-emerged. McGregor's claim that he is currently in his prime sent shockwaves through the MMA community. Is it possible? Can a man in his mid-30s, after a catastrophic leg break and half a decade away, really be better than the version that knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds? Conor believes so. He spoke about his clinical approach to this camp, the scientific precision of his weight cut, and his belief that he has evolved into a more complete martial artist. Across the table, Max Holloway watched this display with the calm of a man who has seen it all. Holloway's journey to this moment has been defined by a different kind of fire. If Conor is a lightning bolt, Max is a forest fire, slow-burning, relentless, and impossible to extinguish. Max doesn't need to talk about his prime because he is living it. His performance at UFC 300 was a masterclass in violence and technique, a reminder that the blessed era is far from over. The press conference revealed a fascinating tactical battle even before the first punch was thrown. Max Holloway's deep waters philosophy is more than just a catchphrase, it's a psychological weapon. He knows that Conor's greatest weakness has historically been his cardio in the later rounds. By reminding Conor, and the world, that he plans to drag this fight into the 4th and 5th rounds, Max is testing Conor's confidence. He is asking the question, do you still have the heart to suffer when the lights get dim and the air gets thin? Conor's response was classic McGregor. He dismissed the idea of deep waters, promising instead a quick elimination. He wants to prove that his power hasn't faded, that the left hand is still the touch of death. This is the ultimate clash of styles, the explosive, one-shot power of McGregor versus the relentless, suffocating volume of Holloway. But the story of UFC 329 isn't just a two-man show. The press conference also shone a light on the co-main event, a fight that in any other world would be the headliner. Paddy, the Batty, Pimblett and Benoit St. Denis represent the next generation of stars, and their exchange at the podium was a masterclass in hype. Paddy, the charismatic Scouser with a personality that fills the room, played to the crowd with his usual flair. He knows he is a target, and he wears it like a badge of honor. Benoit St. Denis, on the other hand, is a man of few words and terrifying intentions. The former French Special Forces soldier doesn't care about the fame or the followers. He only cares about the war. His promise to make the fight a hell for Paddy was not a boast, it was a mission statement. The contrast between Paddy's colorful energy and St. Denis's cold, military-like focus added another layer of intensity to the event. As the middle section of our documentary unfolds, we see the ripple effect of this event. It's not just about the fighters, it's about the gate, the records being broken, and the feeling that we are witnessing a turning point in the sport's history. The press conference revealed a UFC that is bigger and more global than ever before, with fans from Dublin to Honolulu and Paris screaming for their heroes. The tension between the fighters is mirrored by the tension in the media. Questions about McGregor's future, a potential boxing rematch with Floyd Mayweather, and the legacy of the BMF belt flew across the room. But through it all, the focus always returned to the two men at the top of the card. McGregor's return is a gamble. If he wins, it is the greatest comeback in sports history. If he loses, it is the final curtain on a legendary career. Holloway, too, is gambling his hard-earned momentum. A loss to a washed McGregor would derail his march toward another title shot. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the pressure is starting to show in the small details, the way Conor taps his foot, the way Max adjusts his glasses, the way the room goes silent when they lock eyes. This is the fire of competition, fueled by the faith they have in themselves. As we head into the final act, the questions remain, who has the stronger will? Who has the better plan? And when the cage door closes, who will be the one left standing in the wreckage of UFC 329? The final minutes of the UFC 329 press conference were not about words. They were about the energy that shifted in the room as the fighters stood up for the traditional face-offs. This is the moment where the masks slip, where the bravado of the podium fades, and the raw reality of the fight takes over. As Conor McGregor and Max Holloway stepped toward the center of the stage, the world seemed to hold its breath. 12 years of history were condensed into those few inches of space between their faces. You could see it in the way McGregor stared, a mix of intense focus and a strange kind of respect. He wasn't looking at the kid he beat in Boston, he was looking at the man who had become his equal. Holloway, for his part, didn't blink. His gaze was steady, cold, and unwavering. In that moment, the deep waters weren't just a metaphor, they were visible in his eyes. The face-off is the final piece of the puzzle for the fans and the analysts. We look for the tremors in the hands, the sweat on the brow, the flicker of doubt in the eyes. But with these two, there was nothing but iron. This is what greatness looks like, two men who have achieved everything, yet are still willing to risk it all for the sake of a competition. But as we look toward the fight itself, we have to consider what happens after the dust settles. UFC 329 is more than just a win or a loss on a record. For Conor McGregor, a victory would be the ultimate validation. It would silence every critic who said he was finished. It would pave the way for a historic title shot at 170 pounds, potentially making him the only three-division champion in UFC history. It would prove that the Mac is not just a brand, but a force of nature that cannot be stopped. However, a loss for Conor would be catastrophic. It would be the confirmation that the game has passed him by, that the 5-year layoff was a bridge too far. It would likely mark the end of his era as a top-tier competitor, leaving him to transition fully into the world of business and celebrity. The stakes for Conor are nothing less than his entire identity as a fighter. For Max Holloway, the stakes are different but equally high. Max is fighting for his place in the pantheon of the greatest of all time. He has already cemented his legacy as one of the best featherweights ever, but beating McGregor in a rematch would be the crowning achievement of his career. It would be the blessed era's greatest triumph, the moment he finally settled the score with the one man who had a victory over him from his youth. And what of the sport itself? UFC 329 represents a bridge between the past and the future. We see the return of the old guard in McGregor and the dominance of the current elite in Holloway. We see the rise of new stars like Paddy Pimblett and Benoit St. Denis. The event is a reminder that the UFC is a living, breathing entity that is constantly evolving, yet always rooted in the fundamental human desire to see who is the best. The press conference also touched on the broader impact of this event. The record-breaking gate, the massive pay-per-view projections, and the global media coverage all point to one thing: the world still stops for Conor McGregor. Love him or hate him, you cannot ignore him. He is the sun around which the MMA universe orbits, and his return has brought a level of excitement that the sport hasn't felt in years. As we conclude this documentary journey, we are left with the image of the two fighters walking away from the stage, heading back to their respective camps for the final hours of preparation. The talking is done. The scripts have been written. The hype has reached its peak. Now, all that remains is the walk to the octagon. The beauty of mixed martial arts is its unpredictability. In those 15 or 25 minutes, anything can happen. A single mistake, a split second of hesitation, or a flash of brilliance can change everything. We don't know if Conor's left hand will find its mark in the first round, or if Max will drag him into the deep waters of the fifth. We don't know if Paddy will prove his doubters wrong, or if St. Denis will deliver on his promise of war, but what we do know is that we are lucky to witness it. We are lucky to live in an era where athletes like McGregor and Holloway are willing to push themselves to the absolute limit for our entertainment and their own glory. UFC 329 is a gift to the fans, a celebration of the sport, and a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. So, as the lights go down and the crowd begins to roar, remember the journey that brought us here. Remember the 12 years of waiting, the injuries, the triumphs, the faith, and the fire. This is not just a fight. This is the resurrection. This is the settling of scores. This is UFC 329. The Mac is back. The blessed era continues. And the world is watching.